Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to our keynote lecture for this year's Design Week of the Department of Landscape Architecture. It's a pleasure to see you all here. I know you have all been already working hard, and through the next few days you will continue to do so. I know that Jody Rosenblatt Naderi, our department chair in landscape architecture, wanted to be here, but unfortunately she had a family emergency that has taken her away. But I know that at this time she's thinking about us because I know how much she wanted to be here to listen to David's keynote. You know, great schools have great events. And some of those events celebrate things that happened a long time ago. And yes, we have few of those, and they're wonderful. But also, we have some events that instead of looking back, are looking forward and are very much alive and wired into what's happening right now. And I think that Design Week is that kind of event. It is an event that brings a lot of excitement to our school, and we know that excitement is related to memory. We tend to remember more the things that are exciting, and that memory is connected to learning. So I think that during the next few days, which of course you have already started yesterday, you're going to have a lot of fun. You're going to harvest a lot of memories, and I'm sure that there's going to be a lot of learning happening. So I want to thank our faculty, the Department of Landscape Architecture, our students, and the wonderful, really amazing group of guests that come to join us to make this event possible in such a wonderful way. I wish you all the best, and now let me just give the mic back to Simon for the actual formal presentation of our speaker. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Guillermo. All right, show of hands. How many of you guys are artists? Hey, that's pretty good. You know, you can go to a kindergarten and ask everybody how many of you guys are artists, and you'll get a pretty good show of hands. And then as you get a little older, like around middle school, there's a couple of weirdos in the back who are brave enough to do that. And then by this point, you tend to see a little bit of that drop off. And I would be one of those weirdos the whole time, putting my hand up, real proud. And I think David would be as well. I want to introduce you guys to David Rubin, who I had to write some stuff down because there's just so much to say about him. He's one of the creative forces behind some of our country's most innovative and extraordinary works of landscape architecture, and we're very lucky to have him here. Let me tell you a little bit about David's office. And to do that, I got to tell you that he practiced as an owner and a partner at Olin as the youngest partner for 21 years, where he found all sorts of new opportunities for expanding the discipline of not only landscape architecture and urban design, but also of a whole host of other disciplines that he sees our profession being able to mediate. And he founded Land Collective about a year ago. Is it tomorrow? It's your birthday?
February 11th is the 1-year anniversary of practice. It was founded 2 years ago. 1 year ago we started practice.
So happy birthday.
Thank you.
We could sing. And let me just tell you about Land Collective real quickly, and you're going to see a lot more in David's slides, but I wanted to just read you from their website a little bit about what they're into. Land Collective is a landscape architecture and urban design studio committed to an emphasis on socially purposeful design. The firm is dedicated to crafting landscapes that create positive change through cross-disciplinary collaborations and the synthesis of art, technology, and the social sciences to create human-centered works. And it's in the public realm that David's work really shines. It's in those spaces that are in between all the buildings in our landscape where that life really comes into play. David went to school at Connecticut College, and he studied art history and fine arts, and he studied at Harvard University and did an MLA there. He's lectured all over the place, including at Harvard and at University of Pennsylvania and at SciArc. And he's got a whole bunch of accolades. It was really easy to find stuff about you online. I don't know if you guys have a chance to, but Architectural Record's done a really wonderful study on him. Forbes has done something. It's incredible how much stuff you've been able to accomplish in as young as you are. David was a Dell Inspiree honoree, and a Dell Inspire honoree, which is this list that Dell puts together of the top 100 influencers in entrepreneurship, philanthropy, education, and media who use technology to inspire others and empower people. And it's just fantastic to have him here today with us. David's a visual thinker, like a lot of us, but more than just seeing the world in images, I think David really sees the world, as he puts it, in panorama. And he brings a much less myopic focus to Design Week, and we're very grateful to have him here for that. Meg Calkins and I were talking after ASLA in Boston, this most recent one, about just some of the highlights of that event. It was held in this expo center that was just this massive, almost airport hangar scaled place, so it was kind of a pain to get from place to place. But it was worth it to get to a few shows, and Meg mentioned David's, and there were a few others. There was just such an amazing show of support from the faculty to bring David here. And so what I'd love to do is just invite you to join me in welcoming David Rubin, our official Design Week speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. I appreciate it. Before I begin, I just also want to extend my thanks to Guillermo and to both to Simon and to Meg for thinking that I might be worthy of coming up here to speak with you. And also to Les and Steve and Philip and Colby for welcoming me into the fold so generously. I have felt extraordinarily welcome, and it's scary as all hell to come into one of these things, and you guys know so much more than I, so I'm incredibly grateful to you. To Cindy and Chris and Malcolm and others in the faculty, and a special shout out to Chen and Zhu and Bella for picking me up at the airport on Saturday evening when they could have been doing many better things than waiting for me at the bottom of the escalator at 10 o'clock at night. With that, I just wanted to outline for you this presentation. Typical in my way of thinking, I can't be settled with what I came in with. When I start listening to all of you talk about the issues associated with Design Week, I'm apt to go back and change presentations and help you sort of see things that I might have experienced that you might want to glean from. And so this is a hodgepodge lecture now. It used to be beautifully sinuous and elegant and streamlined, and now it's all over the place. So I invite your acknowledgement of that. I started with this image to express this topic of empathy-driven design, which is inherent in our studio, because these are people that are at the former workers at the GM plant, and everything that a landscape architect does centers around people. You should never forget that. You may be thinking that you're working primarily with the land, but you're actually working in a socially purposeful context that actually improves culture. And that's extraordinarily important and powerful in the 21st century. You are at an extraordinarily pivotal point in the history of landscape architecture where we are actually prime on projects, leading efforts, having consultants, including building architects, sociologists, engineers, in a way that we previously had not experienced. So it's an incredibly exciting time for you as young practitioners. I've seen that transition taking place. You are the people that are going to be living that. So I start with an apple, and the concept is this notion of gravity. I believe in gravity. It's a universal truth. We all believe in gravity. You just may not articulate it the way that I do. Gravity is that thing that pulls us down to this earth and connects us to a common tissue, right? And it's that tissue that is the realm of landscape architecture. We are all bound to a common plane, and it is the connections that we make as a result of the work that we do that inform culture. And so from my perspective, somebody who works out of a studio called Land Collective, It is the idea that we can create spaces in which people will gather, and as a result of our designs, enter into a conversation. Say a chemistry professor and a young protester who have never met each other come into one of our spaces and end up sitting adjacent to each other because they feel good about that space. And they enter into a conversation, and that conversation comes up, and that idea 10 years down the road saves the world. That's a big, hairy, audacious goal. I'm not smart enough to come up with the idea that saves the world, but I am smart enough to come up with a place where that conversation can take place, and so are you. That's the power of landscape architecture in contemporary culture, to bring people together in a form of conversation. So just a little bit about the studio. I wanted you to get a sense of the breadth of the studio, the notion of the things that we do. I've been designing landscapes over sculpture since my finished my graduate work at Harvard. I started with the Barcelona Olympics. It was my first project, and one of the most recent was the ARC International Wildlife Crossing Competition, where I was one of 6 firms. I made us one of 6 firms internationally to participate in this competition to connect a wildlife corridor. So I invite you to go to the website to take a look at that. Common places are things like parks and plazas. We do a lot of work in academic environments. It's particularly appropriate to the things that we talk about in our studio to work in an academic environment, because if you're ever in a place where you want ideas to be shared, it's at a university level where cross-pollination between different disciplines actually leads to those new ideas. Do a lot of federal stuff, some historic landscapes, one of which I'll talk about today. A lot of competition work. We're actually the on-call design firm for Burrell Happold, an engineering department out of London, because they recognize in us that when they have pedestrian and cyclist bridges and things like that where human beings are involved, they, like us, understand that bridges alight from and land upon landscape. And what we do with these opportunities is actually make placemaking devices out of them. This one at 4 Mile Run in Arlington, Virginia, in the lower left-hand corner, is actually both a pedestrian cyclist bridge, but also an amphitheater that people end up looking back towards the salt marsh at which it's crossing. There's a big social bench that runs along the edge. We do a lot of revitalization work. This project I'll talk about, which is Canal Park in Washington, D.C. And we also have the capacity to design cities. And so Camana Bay, which is actually a city that has been realized since I started practicing. I remember drawing it on trace paper, and it's now a place, and it's quite wonderful. So if you have an opportunity to go see that. It was a collaboration between a building architect and a landscape architect where where equal effort was given to both. I was designing spaces around which buildings could be formed, and the building architects were designing buildings around that actually informed spaces. So it was a very conscious effort to inform the public realm. So when you think about Land Collective, you think about all these categories that we fit in the projects that we like to do, and we have this really great web of depth that is within the studio. By example, I wanted to talk about one of those infrastructure projects, which happened to be a site in Washington, D.C., and I dedicate this particular project to Philip because we were talking about it and I wanted him to see a little bit about this. This is actually a levee project. I got a call from the National Park Service, actually from an engineer who said, the National Park Service said we had to call you. We're designing Potomac Park levee on the National Mall, and we need your help. And so that was really fascinating that the National Park Service would actually reach out and wanted to speak with us. In the 1930s, there was a hurricane that hit Washington, D.C. It inundated the city. It flooded dramatically. Next year, 1934-35, a levee was built. The levee was built here. It goes from the Lincoln Memorial up the north side of the reflecting pool, comes across Constitution Gardens, and stops, and then supposedly meets up with this high point here and then runs along the rest of the mall. And Katrina had hit, and FEMA was remapping all of the flood zones in Washington, D.C., and suddenly the Federal Triangle became one of those 100-year flood stages. So President Obama was all of a sudden potentially underwater, and as was the rest of the Federal Triangle. And so they had to figure out how to solve the problem, because how do you prevent these properties from potentially being inundated? It also deals with insurance issues, because all of these properties then had to be retrofitted, or new buildings had to be built to certain standards, but also everybody had to pay significantly higher flood insurance issues. So that's an incredibly expensive thing, and so what we were given the task of was trying to figure out the stopgap, which is actually right here, of how to solve the problem that hadn't been solved in 72 years. The Army Corps of Engineers are the only people that can actually certify a levee. This piece of property is a National Park Service property, but it's also governed by 7 other agencies. The National Capital Planning Commission, the City of Washington, D.C., the Historic Preservation, and the Committee of Fine Arts, which is a Congress-appointed, the Commission of Fine Arts, which is a Congress-appointed agency, and a couple of others. And so when the National Park Service turned to the Army Corps of Engineers and said that we want to have a landscape architect on board, the Army Corps said, what? Why would we want to have a landscape architect involved in a levee? We don't want to shrub up this levee. We don't want plants of any kind on this levee. And the National Park Service said, well, just hold your horses. You don't know what he can do. Just give him a chance. And so we had a charrette, and a 3-day charrette, and the goal of the charrette was to come up with 6 ideas that any one of those agencies, which was at the table, all of those agencies that I spoke of, could actually agree that one of those solutions would be acceptable to them. And at the end of 3 days, we actually had 6 choices, and all of the agencies did actually agree that any one of those that they went through with could be the acceptable solution. So in 3 days, I did what the Army Corps of Engineers couldn't do in 72 years, which was design a solution that met all the criteria of these other agencies. And I say that, I'm very proud of that, because it's a landscape architect that solved this issue, not an engineer and not a building architect. It's the notion that you can actually deal with infrastructure in a socially purposeful way that actually manages significant issues and actually moves things forward, creating alignment between different agencies by discussing how to solve problems. So when you look at this, it's actually, here's the site at the bottom, and this is the old flood zone, this is the new flood zone, there's the stopgap. Literally just working with topography and historic sight lines and linking monuments through a path system that reinforced how this levee could be utilized, not just for the purpose of dealing with floodwater, but actually connecting people together. The remediation that we were trying to deal with, the new path system, and there's the levee designed up at the top. So it really is a very simple post and panel system that goes up during a flood event. The panels and posts are stored in the road. The road is exposed when the flood event is coming. You only need 24 hours notice, which is actually all, it doesn't take that long for the floodwaters to come up the river. But this was actually informed, most importantly, by a dialogue that took place on day 1 with all of the different agencies. We met on the site to talk about how to solve the problem, and I interviewed every one of the different representatives of the agencies and listened to what they had to say about what the problem was, what they thought the problem was, and what the prospective solution was. And when we were walking, we came upon this little building, which is the lockkeeper's house to the former C&O Canal that used to run along Connecticut Avenue in front of the Capitol building. And I'd never seen that building before. It was actually covered in overgrowth. And I asked, what is this? And they said, well, it's the old lockkeeper's house for the canal. And I had an epiphany, which was that canals are about the control of water and levees are about the control of water. So why don't we try to do something that's pedagogic, that teaches people about the history of the United States, which is what the National Mall is all about, and deal with stormwater management. So that's where this design ended up coming from, this very simple design that, of a wall and post and panel system. So here is the deployment of the levee, which is presently under construction. There's a new plaza associated with the lockkeeper's house. There's a new path system deployed that actually brings people in connection with the other existing path systems. And it's a very simple, elegant design that disappears in the landscape. Most people will pass this by without even seeing it, which is something that I'm incredibly proud of. I don't care that people don't know that it's there. I care that it functions and it reinforces the goals of the National Mall, which is actually to connect people to history. So that's a general sense of what we do in a nutshell. I wanted to start speaking with you particularly about Design Week because there are certain issues that I think that you ought to remember that are always at the fore of your mind when you're dealing with the challenge of the GM site. Had the privilege of going to a Mayor's Institute on City Design effort. It was one of their national efforts. It was down in New Orleans, I had the mayor of New Orleans on my right and the mayor of Baltimore on my left, Stephanie Rawlings Blake, the mayor of Baltimore, and I ended up becoming good friends as a result of this. But the Mayor's Institute on City Design is actually a fascinating agency. I hope that actually the mayor of Muncie might actually consider signing up for this. It's actually where they take 9 mayors from across the country, from all different scales of cities, and 9 designers, and they lock them in a room for 3 days. And the goal is that none of the mayors will have any of their staff and any of their constituents, so they can be free to talk. They don't have to worry about anything getting out. You're sworn to secrecy. Everything that's talked about is kept in silence. They can discuss with the designers one significant design issue that they're dealing with in their city, and they don't understand it necessarily as a design issue. They just express one issue. And the idea is that the 9 designers will talk it out with them and help them generate a vocabulary with which they can go back to their staff, the prospective project owners, their constituency, and be able to speak intelligently about ideas. So this is an incredibly empowering effort, and I encourage folks to learn more about this organization. We're asked to give a presentation, a 5-minute presentation to the mayors in advance of the discussions. And so I was the only landscape architect that was invited to this particular one. Lucky me. It turned out that 7 of the 9 issues were landscape-oriented issues, which tells you a lot about city design right now and the power that you have out there as young practitioners. I gave them this map, which is my hometown, the city of Philadelphia. This is a NOLI map. You all know what a NOLI map is. It's the presentation of public and private property. Generally speaking, it's about private property, so you shade in all the private property to reveal all the public property. What I did was switched it and said, okay, well, this is all the private property. Everything in black, or sorry, public property. Everything in black is public. And I put a marker around a certain area that didn't include Philadelphia's rivers, so it's really just the fabric of the city, and did a calculation that said, what is the acreage of the whole site, the building acreage, that is what is private, and then realized what is public. And a significantly larger portion is public, right, in any city fabric. And then I said to them, all right, a building architect designs buildings for specific types of people. There's rarely an opportunity where a building architect designs for everyone. Maybe a library, but even then you have to seek out knowledge. You have to want to seek out knowledge. Landscape architects design everything between buildings, and in some cases on top of buildings. And the constituency is incredibly broad, from very privileged to underserved. And I said, it's this zone that is the least expensive and the easiest to manipulate. And the light bulbs started to go off with these mayors, because they suddenly realized that what I was describing was the breadth of their constituency. The people that vote for them are the people that are most impacted by the least amount of money that is expressed in the public realm. So the least amount you can spend, you can impact more of your constituents and get votes from them. And that's what they want to hear, how to get votes, right? So the light bulbs are flashing off in this room. All 9 of them are like, holy cow. This is a cash cow for us. If I start dealing with these public issues and inform a better environment for people, I'll look pretty good. And that's a very manipulative way of dealing with government, folks. So, but it's really helpful for you. This is a secret weapon. You just begin to start dialogues that actually help them see things from their perspective, which is what we like to do. So, by example, one of them is this revitalization project called Canal Park. Canal Park is also in Washington, D.C., and it's at the other end of the canal. I'm honored. So there's that levee right there, and this is Canal Park right here, and there's the Capitol building, and there's Mr. Obama right there. And the site itself was an old canal. It's 3 blocks in the Southeast District, a neighborhood that really fell apart, had nothing of fabric to it, really. A significant number of lower income citizens. And the city was trying to figure out, how do we invigorate this place? What do we do? And the notion was to take this parcel, these 3 blocks, and figure out through a public-private partnership, a bid, so the business improvement district and private developers, how do you inform the neighborhood? And the idea was through a park, which is absolutely appropriate, because parks actually positively inform their surroundings. The great, well-functioning public parks actually increase the value of property exponentially immediately adjacent to it. I'd like you to keep your eye on this building. This is actually a publishing house. It's a place where printing presses are, so it's completely closed in, right? Nothing can be seen from within or without. The conceptual design that we came up with was this one. It goes from M Street to I Street, and the 3 blocks are linked. We got them to raise the driving table so that it actually becomes a speed table to slow traffic between the 2 blocks, or the 3 blocks, and actually creates consistent paving so that the blocks themselves are linked through a common vocabulary of material. And we were prime, so I hired a building architect to work with me. I had this concept of linking the 3 blocks with 3 different pavilions. I expressed my ideas about the pavilions. I wanted them to reflect somehow the notion of the old barges that used to float on the canal, and also this notion of floating lanterns as symbols. And so Studios Architecture helped me envision this concept for pavilions. The 3rd block is the most flexible block. It's the most open in terms of its capacity to receive flexible programming. We designed it so that it could house certain numbers of population for movie nights or for bands, and we literally demonstrated, if an individual is standing in an environment, you need a certain amount of physical space between them, and you can actually calculate how many people can actually occupy a site based on program. So the 3rd block had a pavilion on it, this sort of cube that would actually house flexible chairs. The notion was that you would take a St. James slingback chair, like St. James Park, and a kid would stand there. This pavilion pops up front, and the kid vends chairs for $2 on your license. You get a chair, you can put it anywhere in the park. The true democratic process of choosing a place. And then when you're done, you bring back the chair, and he gives you your license back, but he keeps the $2, and it's a way of generating income for both him and for the park itself. The 2nd block, they wanted, the bid and the client, the private developers wanted there to be an opportunity to inform everyone, and they had the thing about this project is we had no sense of who was going to be living in this neighborhood. Literally, there was no neighborhood. Most of it had been torn down. There was some worker housing, and we wanted to inform them, but we had no sense of who was going to be there, and that's part of what our design charge was, from our perspective, was to design in such a way that it was flexible and adaptable and could be actually, anyone could participate in it. And so we took our cues from a former project in New York City, where we found that young mothers and nannies with their charges would bring children, because this particular lawn plat had a big broad bench around it with 3 openings, and that if the mothers and nannies stood at the 3 openings, they could actually let kids run free, even if they were adjacent to the Hudson River. And then the park owners realized that they had a captive audience, and they had a cafe on the property, and so if they actually encouraged young mothers and nannies to come, that they might actually have a captive audience for drinking a lot of coffee. And so they started to bring out toys. So at 10 o'clock in the morning, a wheelbarrow of toys is brought out, it's dumped out on the lawn, kids play, 5 o'clock all the toys are brought up, they're stored away in the back of the cafe, and you've managed to actually keep this income generation going on. So we took that as part of our clue. We were working with an artist by the name of David Hess. I said I didn't want to have plop art in any way. The idea was not to have objectification, but actually art that could be used in some way. He took quite literally this notion of that I had about stitching these 3 blocks together, and created this sort of stainless steel stitching mechanism that appears one on each block, but it's a thing for kids to play on as well. The bid wanted to have a monumental fountain. Part of their goal was to have this park compete with the National Mall. Well, that's no small task to compete against that incredible landscape. So we came up with things that were an open joint fountain where it would go away if you needed it to have special events. But we also began to deal with the notion of having food on the property. A cafe would be situated there. And what you're looking at actually is the roof of the cafe. We wanted the roof to be mountable, so it would become a belvedere as well, for people to look down on the people in the fountain. but also have this property work 365 days of the year. So I was recalling my childhood in Ottawa where I was skating on linear canals and actually decided that there needed to be this great skate loop. My original concept was to actually have the loop go for all 3 blocks and come back, but the intersection of moving cars and skaters didn't work out too well. So we reduced it down to 1 block, but it's the nation's 2nd skating loop, and that's something that's quite a lot of fun. So this was the last drawing that we gave to the client prior to construction. But I wanted to take a step back, which is to go back to the old King map of 1818 and show you again where the park is relative to the old canal that used to run up along the mall, what became the mall in the L'Enfant plan. This was one of the photographs that I found doing the sort of research on the site, and this is the canal as it was being, or dying, I should say, in front of the Capitol building, which was being built at the time. And what's really interesting to me is this right here. So this canal took 10 years to build and 2 years to live and die. And the reason why it died was it kept silting up. And the silt actually allowed for succession to take place. And so here are all these opportunistic plants suddenly populating a canal. And another light bulb went off, as it did for the lockkeeper's house. And that is the notion that there was a way of actually referencing the canal in the design by dealing with stormwater. And so on the left side here, or sorry, right side, here are is the rain garden for the site, which is sort of the reference to the old canal. And the notion that every block would have a part of its landscape described by the succession of the Anacostia from open water to woodland edge, and that those plant species would be utilized to reinforce that notion. So it was very important to me that the rain garden actually be prospectively occupiable, because it's not always going to be inundated. The idea is that you should be able to use it wherever possible. And so our drawings tried to reinforce that there would be some social context for the rain garden itself. And so here are the 3 blocks. This was the original conceptual drawing. And what I wanted to point out to you was this. This is an actual open property. This is an open property. This is an open property that was designated for commercial value. These would be worker housing, so that there would be a gesture towards the cross-section of our population. This was actually a trash transfer station, and this was the old publishing house that I pointed out. And what was important for me to help you understand is actually we did something that was very novel. We convinced the government that we could pipe under the buildings and attach this landscape through infrastructure to the adjacent properties. Because what this park is, besides a social engine, is a machine. This park actually captures 86,000 gallons in cisterns that prevents 1.5 million gallons of water from entering into the Anacostia's or the DC's combined stormwater sewer system, which is often overtaxed and floods into the Anacostia raw sewage. So we're actually not only capturing the water on the site, but we're actually capturing water from those adjacent properties by piping under the street. And as long as we take care of the pipes, or as long as the bid takes care of the pipes, everything is good. So that when buildings are built on those adjacent properties and rain comes down, the pipe actually goes up to their roof and captures their water and brings it into the system as well, which then pipes it back up and, using gravity, filters it through the rain garden, and it gets used for toilet flushing and for topping off the fountain and for flushing toilets, I think I said. So the notion is that it's very much a circular system that works. The property also has 28 geothermal wells that serve to reinforce the energy use of the skating rink and the pavilion itself. And there are 8 electric car charging stations here. It's probably the most sustainable public park in the United States right now, and we're very proud of that. And the reason why this came about was actually the day that we were signing the contract to do this, the recession hit, and all of a sudden all the money that was dedicated to this project went away. And it was the job of an attorney who had been hired by the bid to go out and find all the public monies that were suddenly becoming available for infrastructure, and dealing with the grants to get that money, and then using that money to work with the park, which is why we have so many car charging stations and all of these other things that were part of that public money. So this machine, this is actually just a diagram of the stormwater system. You can see how the adjacent properties end up capturing stormwater, and then it's brought in and circled back through, and it irrigates and deals with toilet flushing and deals with the ice skating rink and such. So that, in the end, the park itself is this incredible representation of how to deal creatively with infrastructure money at a design level that promotes social good. This is what success looks like. So for us, a successful space is one that's well attended, and on opening day, here were people gathering to, this is the only time you're going to see the fountain and the skating rink on at the same time, but this was opening day as the public began to experience the site. The moment the mayor got off of the Zamboni, doing the initial inaugural lap, people were up on top of the Cafe Belvedere looking down, people were skating. It was quite wonderful. It was running well into the evenings. One of the signifier cubes was running live feed of skaters on it, and it's designed, this cube is actually designed to receive video art, so the art component gets addressed. And there's that building, the Publisher House. Talk about economic drivers. This park, while it was being built, they realized that they had a much more value in an occupiable property than in something that just held machines. And they reglazed the surface of, they reglazed the building, and it became an occupied building that had a gallery at its base and faced the park. And again, so it starts the process of creating neighborhood as we want to see it. There's the cube where the kid vends the chairs, lit at night. The original idea was that it would be brighter based on the number of people in the park. We couldn't get that algorithm to work at the time, so it just glows. But I've actually figured that out since then, and I plan to use that notion elsewhere. Day one, a young mother finding the place where the kids might play, but knowing, and then in the summertime, this is the sign of success. When the gourmet food trucks start finding this park, you've hit it good, right? Because then they realize that there's a population that can participate. Young nannies, a father bringing their kid to play in one of the fountains. Movie night, real simple gesture, Iron Man playing in the middle of the summer on one of the open lawn plats. Again, the notion was that this was a neighborhood park that had a very diverse user group from the underserved to well-privileged, and we had a capacity to deal with everybody. A young urbanite using his, tweeting his cell phone, in the middle of the park. This is actually the rain garden in its first year, beautifully floriferous, actually, and quite good at disguising itself as a rain garden. But this is what success looks like to me. This is what I call joy in the fountain. These young kids from the adjacent neighborhood who had nowhere else to go now have a place to go and are having a damn good time. I mean, these kids were hams in front of the camera, and I was having a blast just sharing, this is what joy looks like to me. So the thing that was, really great in the end was that while design magazines were saying this was a good place, here's a business magazine saying that this is exactly what is appropriate for the 21st century. And that in itself was an incredibly heartening thing, because the goal of this was to be an income generator. It was to redefine a neighborhood in such a way that it could be revitalized, and to design it in such a way that it received everyone. This is the kid reminding me that we believe in gravity. Anyway, part two, and this is where we get a little bit disjointed, but I wanted to, this was something that came up as a result of some of the things that we were talking about out there. This is a recent statistic that just came out where 85 people in the world actually have the same amount of money than 3.5 billion people of the poorest people, right? So there's this, it just speaks to the inequity in our world right now. It's getting more and more extreme. As landscape architects, we have to begin to start thinking about how do we mediate this. How do we deal with giving everyone an opportunity through design? My notion is that you end up taking, you both reach out and you reach within to actually establish connections. And that is what we do in a socially purposeful landscape, is actually deal with the connections to bring people together. Remember, my big, hairy, audacious goal is to put somebody here and somebody here who don't normally engage each other and create a dialogue between them. And so one of the things that I think that you will be charged with is continuing this effort. So by 2030, 60% of the world will live within a city, which is another incredible statistic, because it has to deal with how do you get these people the things that they need, one of which is food. And the notion of dealing with the consumption of food in a very nutritious way and figuring out how to get what used to be very proximate and is now very distant, how do you get food into the urban context? Keeping society, the reflection of society is actually how well it treats its people. And so we as landscape architects will start to deal with this problem of defining landscapes that actually inform our future. We know this in the form of the White House's goals to have good nutrition by having urban agriculture begin to inform its citizenry. And you may know it also through organizations like the Edible Schoolyard, something that Alice Waters espouses, putting edible landscapes in schools where kids can actually learn about not only how to cultivate their own nutrition, but ingest it as well. So this goes back to something that I spoke about at the ASLA that Meg ended up seeing previously, and so if she's in the audience, I apologize for the redundancy. But the notion is there's this incredible union that's happening between .coms, which is us, the designers, .orgs, those non-for-profits that are looking out for the citizenry of the world, and .govs, the notion that government has a role in fostering an extraordinary environment for its citizens. And so if Land Collective represents the .com, this is one project that I wanted to share with you. It's that special union between those three things. I ended up leading a team of landscape architects from a variety of design firms in support of Eskenazi Health, which is located not too far from here in Indianapolis, formerly known as Wishart. It's a public hospital, and the city of Indianapolis coming together as part of the team. Not too long ago, the citizens of Marion County elected to, on a non-presidential election year, to support a bond that brought in $754 million to rejuvenate their public health system. This is a catch-all hospital, right? It's the notion that the citizens of Indianapolis and Marion County said, we want to support our community through better health, and everyone should have the opportunity to be well. And so that was an incredible thing. So I'll go back one, sorry. The guy in the back of this photograph is Matt Gutwein. He's the president and CEO of Marion County Health, the fellow that actually ran the effort to get this election happen, this vote happening. And he called me one day. It was a cold call. He had heard about the studio, my efforts, and I took the call, and we ended up becoming best friends in an hour. It's because he believes in health systems the same way that I believe in landscape architecture, which is it has a place for everyone, that whether you're privileged or underserved, you will find value in it. He believes that in his health system. I believe that that's the role of a landscape architect, to inform that breadth of humanity. And so I went in for my interview. He met me at the lobby. While I was waiting for him, I had the chance to observe the users of Eskenazi, Wishart, and I recognized one thing that was very much in common, and that was the size of the population that was coming into the hospital. They were physically larger people. And again, one of those moments of epiphany where I realized that there was the prospect for the landscape to actually inform the health of the population, so that not only the services in the building, but the landscape itself ended up supporting it. The old Wishart is this rabbit warren of hallways and where I was like, I was actually walking down the corridor and getting lost with the CEO, and I was like, Matt, you need to help me get out of here once you get me in here. It was that bad. We ended up coming with some conceptual ideas, some principles that would lead the project. One was this notion of water and the native landscape, and that somehow water had to be affiliated with the act of healing. The notion that nutrition, that Wishart had a history of good nutrition, and that the current trends with Michael Pollan suggest that this hospital was a leader, and we have new ideals about how nutrition should inform ourselves. But that art, which was also a part of Wishart's history, could also do that. So to remember to take your daily dose of vitamins of color is this piece by Tat Phu Tan. It's a nature matching system. All of those colors were derived from native vegetation. The property that they were moving to, this represents 5-minute concentric walk rings. And the thing that was really interesting was that given where they were going to be situated, the only accessible food was fast food, which is not generally good for you. And so one of the things that we talked about with them was how to deal with nourishment on the property. And previously, the hospital had been serving fried foods and other things. And in the process of this design, they decided actually to get rid of all heavily processed foods, and in addition to dealing with site-related stuff. So this ended up being our program, this notion of conceptualizing healing and wellness, nutrition and growth, arts and entertainment, and words and learning, all into this one landscape that would become Wishart Commons. And so here's the campus that we delineated. At its center is a plaza, which is a little over an acre. And that task of designing that beyond the conceptualization of the whole project, that particular landscape was given to me to lead the design. There was also, on top of the clinic building, the idea that you would have a productive landscape. So the building that faced this square would have on it a farm. And I named it Sky Farm because it just seemed really great. And the notion was that on Sky Farm there would be this productive landscape that would then inform a cafe that would be given back to the public, so that this square that sat within in front of the building would actually, and is embraced by the hospital, would actually be given back to the citizenry of Indianapolis. The component parts included a trellis and 2 fountains and programmable space, and it ended up becoming named Common Ground, where the notion was that under a portion of this would be a cafe that would serve the clients of Wishart and anyone else who wished to go there. On the roof, the Sky Farm, as we envisioned it, was this sort of drawing of not only patients going out there to find wellness in the act of cultivation, which is part of the healing process, but then also to generate food that would be used. So it slowly became designed and built, and at one point we actually had to hire the farmer to do this. So we looked to growingplacesindy.org, which is an organization that we had become familiar with because they were doing something in White River State Park in Indianapolis. They actually took one of the portion of the landscape and actually made it a cultivated, productive landscape. And so we invited them, these 3 folks, Tyler, Laura, and Matthew, to come and be the farmers. And they are the full-time farmers of Sky Farm, along with a couple of other properties. And they were previously dealing with the landscape that was in White River State Park and had developed that into a program of learning to teach people how to not only grow, but also vend their food. So here's a plan of the Sky Farm, and then this is it rendered for productivity, so it's the list of vegetables that would be grown depending upon the period. And in 2014, this is what their planned crop for this summer is going to be, and their herbs and flowers that will be grown, and what their goal. And there are literally going to be 15 shares that go out to organizations, but that also there would be food that would be vended in the cafe itself. And here's the Sky Farm today, just before winter set in. And the thing that I think is really important about this is that the Sky Farm sits with a panoramic view of Indianapolis. So it really gestures back to the city that it serves, which I think is incredibly powerful. Another intersection between .org, .com, and .gov is something that I did not do, but having become friends with the mayor of Baltimore through that Mayor's Institute session is I learned about this wonderful job that Air St. Gross was doing. They're a building and landscape architecture firm in Baltimore. They were doing it in cooperation with their BID, the Greater Baltimore Committee, and the city of Baltimore itself. I encourage you to write down keywords like Adam Ravestein and The Last Mile and go to YouTube to look at this particular presentation. You have to love a presentation that starts out with, the city of Baltimore is the Susan Boyle of East Coast cities. Not kind of homely, but incredibly talented, right? And that's a really great way of describing a city. And the notion is that you never get a second chance to make a first impression, and this project is called the Green Mile. And the Green Mile runs along the eastern corridor. There's my hometown is Philadelphia, Baltimore is to our south. It's the notion that the northeast corridor of Amtrak runs right through Baltimore, but most people don't get off in Baltimore. Most people just pass through. And what do people see when they're coming into Baltimore? What they see is not much. Here is that the approach where the solid line is above grade, where the dotted line is below grade, and the star in the center is Penn Station, Baltimore. It's a 5-mile tract of some of the most challenging landscape you'll ever see. And so one of the things that they began to do was to break it down, like the excellent designers that they are, into the component parts and do visual case studies. So they actually identified key nodes along the approach and began to map them through visual information by taking photographs. They literally got on the train and started to take photographs. And what do people see as they approach Baltimore? And this is that notion that a city takes pride in how it is perceived. And what can you do to redefine a governance in such a way that people not only are proud of it from the stance of people being there, but people are impressed with it as a symbol for that city. So this is what you see as you move up. It's really just scenes from The Wire. It's pretty brutal stuff. Lots of remnant parcels adjacent to the railway, and it's very much the case that the other side of the railway tracks is the challenged neighborhood in Baltimore. And there's the Penn Station property. So it's looking pretty bleak. And so the first thing that they wanted to do was establish an infrastructure that links the green components of the city and brings them, in some cases, right down to the waterfront. The area of study is that area that is highlighted. That's the point at which the tracks actually turn into and create these very weird parcels before it goes underground. And so what they were looking at specifically was who owns those existing conditions, and what do they look like, and how actually can they be improved. There is nothing but improvement that is possible in this property, on these properties. One of the other key issues that the city is dealing with is there's a significant food desert, that the impoverished nature of the city suggests that there is not enough food opportunity for people. If you are a low-income citizen, big organizations like on the East Coast, it would be Acme. I can't remember what the supermarkets here are called, but it's this notion that they don't come into downtown environments where they might not have enough to sell, or they might not generate enough income. So Air St. Gross decided, all right, well, we're going to deal with these properties in a very productive way, not just in terms of nutrition, but in terms of the actual green infrastructure of the city itself. And I think this is an incredible case study where they're promoting community gardens and urban agriculture and stormwater management. And again, we're talking about the GM site in many respects. It just happens to be an elongated GM site. So keep some of these things in mind for your own projects. They wanted to actually marry up street systems to begin to link up those green areas wherever possible. And this was one of the sections that they drew in terms of the profile. But then this was the real goal, which was to actually inform its citizenry in a way that would be incredibly positive for them and empowering for them and give them hope, which is something that we've talked about with regard to the GM site, where they actually become reconditioned themselves to grow and actually produce and sell to make money. And so it's an incredibly powerful prospect and involves many different upstart companies, some for profit, some not for profit. But the notion is that you use the Amtrak corridor as a device to redefine symbolically and physically what is the power of a city. And so you end up taking parcels and beginning to think about them in terms of linkages and how actually these abandoned and parcels could actually be reconditioned. Who owns them? Are they underdeveloped? How do you take them into some advantage that actually becomes productive? So from my perspective right now, and the reason why I think it's incredibly powerful and heady stuff, is that you as young practitioners are clearly poised. Whether you understand it or not, you are clearly poised in redefining the American landscape. So I'm going to go into a bit of theory, and I apologize if I'm stepping on some historians' toes right now. But there, if you think about where we came from as a defined landscape, as a defined government, we actually found ourselves growing out of the budding off of the parliamentary system of England. Most of us emigrated from, originally this country was founded by English people, and they brought their symbolism with them, and it became part of our own culture. So in the 18th century, young gentry from the wealthy English families were going on the Grand Tour looking to Italy for information about symbolism. And this was just when Queen Anne had died and the parliamentary system was rising in power. The Whig Party was coming up in power, and they were looking to redefine the English landscape as a symbol. Previous to this, as is referenced in this slide of Chiswick, this is actually the same place, just 10 years apart. This is Chiswick here, a manor house, and these are all the gardens associated with the property, all of which reference French and Dutch landscapes. And this is it about 20 years later, and it is something completely different, but it is the same place. And so what happened? Well, people like Lord Burlington, who owned this property, went on the Grand Tour to find, he was a member of the Whig Party, and he wanted to reclassify how England represented itself as a symbol. And so they went to, they believed themselves to be the inheritors of the Roman Empire. And he went on the Grand Tour to find the remnant Renaissance and Roman Republican, as in lowercase r, landscapes, which really didn't exist at that time. But nevertheless, he went and collected information, which in architectural terms became the sort of influence of Palladio on structures, but in our case, as landscape architects, became part of the symbolic representation of landscape, where we were literally taking Claude Lorraine and Poussin and taking that art and bringing it and making it manifest in the form of government symbols, so that his property, Lord Burlington's property, becomes this incredibly bucolic, the beginnings of English landscape. In the end, Capability Brown takes that and puts it on steroids, and all of a sudden you get these extraordinary places like Blenheim, which are not at all real, but become emblematic of English, the identity of England. So like at Chiswick, here is Pompey and Cicero, or Pompey and Caesar being confronted by Cicero in the landscape, quite literally, where the Republican ideals are chastising the empirical ideas. So it's no wonder that as a budding off of this English system, we as the next iteration of democracy ended up selecting these Roman ideals as ways of representing our government, which is why our capitals all look like old Roman temples. And indeed, the other stuff that came with it are things like the lawn, which grows really well in England but doesn't grow well at all in the United States. So that became part of our downfall in terms of sustainability, which we're slowly recovering from. But what it does make me think of is the fact that it's our job. I actually believe as landscape architects that we're only just coming into the definition of what an American landscape is. And you will be dealing with that symbolically, so that the connective tissue upon which we're all standing ends up being that thing that represents us as citizens of the world, as American citizens of the world abroad. So I started with an apple, and I give that apple back to you for your consumption. Thank you.
Dave, would you mind
No,
answering a few
absolutely.
questions? If anybody has some questions, I can.
Yeah.
In terms of the canal park, how do you clean? In terms of the canal park, how do you clean the stormwater before you use them into the restroom?
Yeah. So it's actually being cleaned by going through the process of the cyclical process of going through filtration, and the filtration is actually a natural filtration. Literally, the profile of the soils are such that as water gets percolates through, it gets reabsorbed into the tank system, and it keeps recirculating so that the stormwater, which is being collected from non-driven surfaces, so again, sidewalks and roofs, is in itself not necessarily filled with oil, although there are oil centrifuges that separate the oil out. It is relatively clean. It's gray, but it's on the cleaner end. Keeps getting cleaned until it finally goes into the toilet flushing, the topping off of fountains and things like that. So it happens in the ground. Yes?
You talk a lot about with empathy. You talk about a lot about speaking with beginning your projects, these CEOs, and these mayors, and understanding the community's needs. But with empathy-driven design, what initial steps do you take to engage the community and the public to really understand and assess their feelings and their needs?
It's called the active listening, and it's actively listening. It's not just giving lip service to listening. It's the notion that you gather people up in the beginning of a process and you make them equal owners in the outcome of it. And one of the things that I was trying to illustrate with regard to the levee project was that it was actually the act of listening to all these different agencies, finding the common alignment, creating a design where that alignment was represented, and knowing full well that all of these other agencies, which were all over the place, suddenly had something that they could stand behind and actually lead them in that process. You do the same thing with community engagement. In Canal Park, we held, and in other projects we ended up holding, you go out to the community, you solicit them for coming to a meeting, you literally do things like, you tell them what your aspirations are without giving them any design whatsoever, right? The worst thing you could ever do is give them a design right up front saying, this is going to be for you. And they're like, well, we have nothing to do with that. What you want to do is actually go there and say, what are your needs? What is do you need a place for kids where kids can find shelter? Do you need a place where your kids can be occupied? Do you need a place where you can have a market? Do you need a place where, and you begin the process and then you just start listening, because once you get them started, they're just going to put it up there. And so like what we did the other night, where we were literally shouting out, what did we hear? We're literally doing that by putting it up on the wall and dot matrix voting, and you give people 5 stickers, and you at the 10 top, what are your 10 top things, and they go and vote, and you begin to mark it down, and it's really playing this this role of establishing alignment, and it behooves you to, even if you don't know how to deal with something, to go back to your studio and try to understand what that issue is. You're never going to be able to satisfy everyone 100%. But if you can get a majority behind what you're doing because it answers and solves some of their problems, you'll find it a much easier task in the public realm of dealing with project types. Empathy-driven design, I should say that I'm 50 years old, and I've gone through a lot of battery of tests in terms of psycho stuff. And every time I get tested for whether it's the DISC survey or the Myers-Briggs or whatever, I end up getting charted as somebody who should be a diplomat, which is not what I am. I'm a landscape architect. I find that I do deal with diplomatic services because I really chart high in empathy. It's an inherent thing in the way that I was raised. I have a capacity to stand behind myself and look at the broader context and take myself out of the equation and put myself in your body and try to see how you're responding to something that I say. And that's a very unique quality it can be learned. It's not something that's it's just not part of my DNA. But it's the type of thing that you all, as designers, would behoove yourselves to try to learn about. I would bring on sociologists to your projects. Sociologists, I think, are far more important than any other collaborator, because if you look up Keith Hampton out of Rutgers, or you look up David Brain out of University of Florida, I think he is, or Florida International University, and a couple of others. These are the folks that are the William Whites of the 21st century. And they have been observing how people use public space in the context of technology of the 21st century. William White was working in the 60s and 70s and 80s. He helped my old firm with Bryant Park. When you combine this notion of trying to understand what human behavior is like, and you marry that to strong empathy skills or a desire to actually listen and apply and appreciate what it means to be in a space, that's a pretty powerful combination. In our studio, we very clearly state that social sustainability is the first sieve of design. When you're filtering a design through a process, every first gesture is about how, whether you're applying a pen to paper or a mouse to mouse click, you're thinking about what you're doing, what the end result will be in terms of how somebody will receive that information. So for us, we're always thinking about how do you deal with fixed or movable furnishings to create conversational groupings. It's less about laying a graphic down in the design and extruding it up and saying, isn't that wonderful? Well, I'm going to challenge you to then describe to me what it's going to be like to be in that space. Because those types of spaces that are just extruded up and say, isn't that fantastic, end up being flashes in the pan. They're faddish. They're Harlequin patterns writ across the landscape that get demolished 10 years later. And that's not of value to me personally. I design for my grandnieces and grandnephews. They are the inheritors of my work. I will be long gone before my work becomes mature. And I want it to last. And the only way to do it in a lasting way is to think about the people who will be using it. And that's what empathy-driven design is all about.
I think this diplomacy was really interesting, and you gave two examples, the Washington and the Eskenazi Hospital, where it seemed like there was a real serendipity between the designer and sort of moving ahead with, kind of, let's work this out.
Yeah.
How do you work with intractable clients? The ones that know what they know and they're going to do that, and they want you to validate that because you're the fancy person that's going to give it a pedigree or something like that.
I've been working for 22 years now, and although my practice is new, my own personal practice is new, I reserve the right to say no. I actually interview clients as much as they interview me, and will not work for somebody who doesn't meet our ideals, right? It sometimes means that I have to go without, but I actually have a backlog of work, okay? But I mean, it's like, the notion is that design is really hard. I want to have a good time doing what I want to do, and if somebody's going to stand in my way of having a good time doing hard work, they're not worth my time. It takes 5 to 6 years to build one of these projects from conception to reality. That's a long time to throw away if you're working with somebody who's an asshole, quite honestly. And I don't want to do that. So I just decided that I have my threshold. I do work with jerks sometimes, but I mean, it's like you have to, sometimes they're a little bit more malleable than others. You're not taping the asshole part, are you?
This is to the previous question, or the one before, is similar to that. You talk about listening to people and what they want. Do you believe that people always truly know what they want, or are there times where you've listened to people and thought what they think they want is not what they'll really want or will last? How do you balance your ideas about what works versus really wanting to know what the people think?
Yeah, it's a challenge actually, because a lot of the times people don't know what they want. They think they know what they want because somebody down the street has it. And the sort of keeping up with the Joneses notion actually may not be the thing that solves their problem. So what you have to do is listen to what they have to say, and then in response, reply, this is what I think I've heard you say, and then demonstrate through other projects what actually might solve their problem better. And you'd be surprised, once clients are educatable, and everyone is a client, right? So whether you're the owner or whether the user or whatever, everyone is the client. So that spectrum tends to be very broad, but people are smart enough to be educated, right? If you at least acknowledge that you listen to them and you show them what they've said and you show them the other thing and why what they said is actually probably this thing, they're like, oh yeah, that's right. That's what I want. And so it really does become part of that listening and dialoguing process. It is possible to change people's minds. Occasionally you find that you can't do that, and you don't have the opportunity to say no, I don't want to do that, but you have to figure out how to make that work within your system. It is a challenge. It doesn't work all the time, but if you listen and genuinely hear, you can return it back to them in a very positive way, something that will actually solve their problem. And the thing to do is to deal with metrics and case studies. And that's the thing that landscape architects are really becoming familiar with now, is actually the use of metrics. It's not just enough to say this is going to be warm and fuzzy. You have to actually say, this is, by doing X, you actually quantify Y. It's what's been done with Canal Park, establishing the metrics post-use, who is actually using it, how long are they using it, where are they coming from, how long do they stay. That's a lot of good information, and you have to be willing to find that information or generate that information these days. It's actually why engineers get listened to more regularly than landscape architects, is because A plus B equals C to an engineer, and sometimes landscape architecture is a little bit more fuzzy than that, because we deal with so many different issues. We deal with sociology, we deal with living systems, we deal with static systems, we deal with economics, and there's a lot that's in play, and being able to quantify that and represent that back is going to be your strongest asset in the future.
Kind of building off that discussion, how do you approach molding your clients to the site as well as molding the site to your clients' wants and needs? Is there any golden formula that you've kind of developed over your years of practice?
No golden formula. I do find that my first responses, my gut responses, it's again sort of a Malcolm Gladwell kind of thing, the notion of blink. The first response usually tends to be the strongest and the most appropriate. So the gut reaction is the thing that I look for. Eskenazi's project, the one down in Indianapolis, I labored over that for a long time. I was sitting in I would go to meetings with the client. We were talking about, program and, the ideals, the guidelines and stuff, and I still did not have a final parti. And that scared the crap out of me, that I couldn't come up with something that I thought worked. But one day I was sitting at the Indy airport bar drinking a Hefeweizen, and I had an epiphany that I drew on a napkin, and there it was. It came out, and that's what I was waiting for. My old boss, or my old partner, Laurie Olin, he has about 30 years on me, and he is a genius. He's quite good at what he does, he has this sort of sage approach, and his position in life warrants the idea that you follow his methods. Or his ideas. I like to say he gives birth to ideas fully formed, like Athena from Zeus's head, comes out, puts it on the table, says, draw that, and he goes away and the kids draw that, and that's what gets built. It's perfect. I give birth to Athena, and every once in a while her bra strap is falling off, or she doesn't quite have her sarong on, right? And I have to invite my colleagues to help me make this better. I know what the good idea is, I just don't know all the stuff. Yet, I'm young in this profession, and So I look forward to that day where I can give birth to Athena fully formed. But from my way of thinking, the people that work with me are equally smart and come up with ideas that can inform the base concept really well. And that's actually how our system works. I'm sorry, I'm diverging from your question a little bit, but in the structure of our studio, I get to come up with a big conceptual idea, and they get to inform it in many different ways and challenge me on ideas. They also, I get to say no. Inevitably, I get to say this is what I want or this is what I don't want. And I also get to put on the show, which I love to do, which I'm doing right now. And those are the three things that make me the principal of the studio. Otherwise, everything is game. I actually try to find people who do more than one thing, because the concept that I come up with will be a strong idea, but I don't necessarily know all the solutions. To that end, I mean, the notion of why the firm is called Land Collective, it's this notion that the collective consciousness raises landscape to the highest ideal, so land is over collective. The firm sometimes gets called David Rubin Land Collective, but the idea of the name Land Collective is that I will drop away, because I know that there are people smarter than me that can do this, very well, and I want them to partner with me in it. It's not just about landscape architecture, it's about the other disciplines of civil engineering and sociology and all these other consciousnesses coming together for a landscape. So it's a very roundabout way of answering your question, but hopefully we got there.
For the sake of time,
Uh-huh.
I feel like we should probably wrap up.
Sure.
Are there any more final questions? That seems like a great place to end. Let me
Okay.
just give you a quick, on Jody's behalf, there's a little present from the Department of Landscape
Oh,
Architecture.
many thanks.
Thanks again, David.
Oh,
for
my
everything.
pleasure. Thank you all very much.